Last Wednesday, the House of Representatives passed the Protect and Serve Act of 2018 by a vote of 382 to 35. The act, a congressional Blue Lives Matter bill, would make it a federal crime to assault a police officer. The Senate version of the bill, which also has broad bipartisan support, goes even further, framing an attack on a police officer as a federal hate crime. A hate crime. The bills exemplify the very worst sort of legislation, at once unnecessary and pernicious. The Protect and Serve Act would allow anyone who knowingly causes serious bodily injury to a law enforcement officer to be imprisoned for up to 10 years, and it creates even harsher penalties for other criminal acts against police. If a police officer were kidnapped, killed, or faced a threat on their life, then the perpetrator could get a much stronger sentence, including potentially life imprisonment. And so we want to tease that out. There's a lot of implications there. A lot of people might listen to that and say, well, that's not so bad. That's like deservedly so or something, or that's not so bad. But there's a lot in there that we really need to, and the implications are immense. I think, we're going to unpack it with Brother Ajamu Baraka, national organizer with Black Alliance for Peace. And I think, brother, welcome to Voice of Vision.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with you once again.
And I think one of the things that I appreciate you being able to do for us and with us is to also unpack the relevance of this to international implications, because people just hear everything is so bound up internationally to local to national in so many ways, the implications, but they're obscure and they're not all very easy for people to put together without a proper tools of analysis. So I know that you probably can help us with that. I don't know if you wanted to just jump in and talk some initial thoughts or information that I may not have said in this opening.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that you laid out the basis of the bill, which is important and really reflective of a shameful turn when it comes to the role of the Congressional Black Caucus. Because one thing that we want to reveal in this conversation, you laid out the fact that the bill passed 382 to 35. Well, in those 382 folks who voted in favor of that bill was a majority of the members of the Congressional Black Caucus. Now, that's important for a couple of reasons. One is that people need to be reminded of the fact that these so-called Blue Lives Matter bills have been circulating for the last few years on the state level. They are bills that have been primarily motivated as a consequence of a reaction to the agitation and organizing on the part of African people and Latinx folks in response to the systematic war being waged against black and brown working class folks in this country. And so these white supremacists, these so-called law and order groups have decided that it's not the police that have been killing folks with impunity that should be the focus. It should be the people who are raising these issues. And in fact, the police should be a protected class against the agitation and organizing from people. So they've been circulating these bills on the state level to protect the police, to make them a protected class, to imply that the police are the ones that are under fire. But this turn last week was really the first example of that racist movement now being transferred to the federal level. And the fact that these members of the Congressional Black Caucus, who understand that this is part of a racist narrative and a racist agenda, for them to embrace this and to support it is another indication of the political bankruptcy and moral degeneracy of that congressional entity, and they need to be called out clearly.
Right. And I wanted to, at some point, I want to read it's so many of them that supported. The best way to do is to read the nays, the 35 who didn't, and then just if their name ain't on there. I mean, I could read some of the others, but it's just easier because there's just so many of them. And I won't do it right now because you have limited time with us, and I'll get to it another time. But one, I'm glad that Karen Bass was one of them that voted against it, because we have in the second half some clip and audio thing we put together with her talking to Jeff Sessions, what do you call it, deposing or whatever you want to call it, and about this black identity extremist issue. And I was wondering, because all these things are tied together, like the ability to kind of use black identity extremists, and I mean just the role of the local police in carrying out and carrying out policies that are tantamount to COINTELPRO, the FBI's counterintelligence program, and things like that. Yeah.
Well, this, you're right. They're all linked. And I think what we have to also be reminded of is that this vote by the majority of the Congressional Black Caucus was not an anomaly. That this kind of conservative embracing of the agenda of the ruling elite is something that they have been involved in for the last almost 2 decades. And there's reasons for that we can maybe talk about at some point in terms of the lack of accountability. But, 32 members of the CBC rejected a bill that would have shut down the Department of Defense's 1033 program. Now, very quickly, and for your listeners, I know they already know this, but just very quickly for folks who may not know, the 1033 program is that program that's been used by the federal government to transfer military equipment from the military to the police forces across the country. It is the program primarily responsible for the militarization of the police forces. And there was an attempt to try to shut that program down, but that attempt was defeated, and 32 members of the Congressional Black Caucus voted with the majority to reject that program being shut down. So this is the kind of collaboration that we're seeing that these individuals have been involved in vis-a-vis the U.S. state. So this is quite consistent. And the same thing happened a few months back when that obscene military bill was passed that increased military expenditures by $80 billion. Again, a majority of the Congressional Black Caucus voted to expand the military budget with the white majority. So this. I think these are examples of the fact that there's an agenda, there's a ruling class agenda, and that this agenda is being embraced by both parties. This nonsense about us being just focused on the Republicans and giving a pass to these neoliberal Democrats is a position that, if you embrace that basically you are just not only propping up the hegemony of the Democratic Party, but you are actively involved in mystifying and confusing the masses of our people.
Mm-hmm. And with 1033 program and AFRICOM, I see them as connected, and particularly for me as a Pan-Africanist, these kind of things speak to like the oneness, how we really need to be forging some working together transcontinentally, not just in Africa but other places, and what the Black Alliance for Peace is doing in terms of the anti-war or peace movement. Can you just jump in? Go ahead. Definitely.
I think, it's just quite clear to us that we're talking about two sides of the same oppressive coin, the same white supremacist pan-European project, that you have militarism being enhanced in Africa, led primarily by the U.S., but in conjunction with their NATO allies, to militarize the continent, to introduce into the continent a physical military presence, and with the objective of using military force in order to maintain the hegemony, the dominance of the pan-European nations led by the U.S. This process, what Nkrumah talked about collective imperialism. That's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin for us who work in the territory known as the United States of America is in fact the militarization of the police forces, the domestic army, if you will. And that 1033 program is a mechanism by which that's done. And again, both of these efforts recognize the central role of violence to maintain a European hegemony. Now, we know that within the settler colonial context in the U.S., that along with race, violence is at the center of that experience. And but along with the violence directed against elements like ourselves, one thing that kept the society together was ideology. That provided some degree of legitimization to the system. But now with the crisis of capital, the crisis of the neoliberal capitalist order, and how it's being played out within the U.S., all of the social institutions, political institutions are under attack. They have lost legitimacy. You see the percentage of popular support for Congress. So what's happening now is that the reliance on force is even more pronounced than any other time in U.S. history. So therefore, there's vulnerability there in terms of our political organizing. So we've got to recognize these connections, recognize the war being waged, and recognize our possibilities for organizing effective resistance. And that's what we're trying to do with the Black Alliance for Peace. We are for peace like any rational human being, but we understand that there will be no peace without justice. And to have justice, one has to fight. So the Black Alliance for Peace is a fighting formation, understanding the war being waged against us and understanding that in order for us to be effective in dealing with this war being waged against us, we've got to organize ourselves and be prepared to meet force with force.
And before I let you go, because people should check out blackallianceforpeace.org. And one of the things that you just reminded me of that I want to ask you about, because last week I had the honor of being preempted by Free Palestine and the honoring of the Nakba, and I know that, which is the catastrophe against recognizing the catastrophe from the Palestinians. But I know the Black Alliance for Peace, and I say we at this point because we part of it, Upaka, put out that statement. And I want to know if you could kind of capsulize some summary about the position on that and its relevance.
Well, yes, and the Black Alliance for Peace is, of course, a collection of its member organizations, and PACA is a fundamentally important part of that. And the statement that was put out by the Alliance was to basically condemn the violence being perpetrated by the Israeli colonial state. We wanted to remind people that violence that we see being unleashed against the Palestinians could not have happened without the active and continued support from the U.S. settler colonial state. We pointed out the fact that with the 70th anniversary of the Nakba, that basically was commemorated on the part of the Israelis by murdering now over 60 people and shooting a couple of thousand. And we say that basically we want to see definitive opposition being expressed, not only from moral elements within the U.S., but we say that the concerned black the Congressional Black Caucus should make a definitive statement condemning Israeli violence. We say that the leadership of the Poor People's Campaign should also be very clear about a definitive statement condemning that violence, since we are organizing a new moral movement in the U.S. So we are calling on opposition for the black community. We are calling on the black community to demand that their representatives are accountable and that they make it quite clear that the black community, and specifically the black working class, we're not going to support this kind of barbaric behavior on the part of the U.S. state, and their vassal Fort Israel elements there in the so-called Middle East.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And one of the things to me is there's a heavy cognitive dissonance in the U.S. that's concentrated among the most economically and politically privileged. And one of the examples is that how there's partisan, like stark bipartisan hypocrisy regarding the pretext or the justification the U.S. used to bomb Syria versus not only inaction but outright almost justifying Israel's massacre of the peaceful Palestinians. And no talk. Not only is there no talk about doing anything to Israel for this, they just they promote it, they prop it up. It's a stark hypocrisy, which to me just exposes the political decadence in the United States.
And we say, where are the voices from the Democrat Party condemning the violence of Israel? They prepared, they were able and supported the incursions and violence against Syria. But where is that moral, consistent voice condemning the Israelis from these people who say that they believe in humanity and believe in Black Lives Matter and all this kind of nonsense? We say that basically, again, those forces have been exposed for the moral decadence that they embrace and for their moral hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This is Ajamu Baraka, National Organizer for Black Alliance for Peace. Thank you, brother, for being on the show.